I don't want to start another OTA video being like, yo, I called it, but in my Kahori review, I discussed how the card felt a little mid, and it's primarily because although I was having a ton of fun playing Victoria hand decks again, I was being successful on the ladder. What the issue was that I felt like that Devil Dinosaur hand generation archetype as a whole needed a little more. Very specifically, I said in the video, I can see Devil Dinosaur getting buffed. Devil Dinosaur might be one of the weak links to this list, and sure enough, here we are in the next OTA, Devil Dinosaur, a Series 1 card, one of the absolute fan favorites that honestly sees no play, is getting a buff. It's not crazy. You're going from 5-3 to 5-4, but you know, power's power. We've all lost games by 1 power, right? And it's also worth noting that Ronin is a 5-5, and it's much harder to get Ronin to work for you as opposed to Devil Dinosaur. So, Devil Dinosaur is now a 5-4 that gets 2+ power for each card in your hand. And I like this a lot. Anytime you're buffing relatively low collection level cards, I think that's fantastic, because Devil Dinosaur, if it's good, is the kind of card that people coming back or even joining Marvel Snap, especially with the Snap packs coming, can utilize in order for it to, like, you know, just be competitive. Relatively inexpensive, competitive. A lot of hand generation cards are relatively early collection level. Yes, of course, you have the min-maxing stuff of Moonstone and everything, which is still going to be Series 5. But having an archetype that's accessible and good, and the linchpin card, a card like Devil Dinosaur, being good is important to that. So I love this change a lot. And it does break my heart that Devil Dinosaur is seeing a less than 1% meta share, right? At 46% win rate, I mean, that's basically non-existent. And so it's great to see that Devil Dinosaur is finally getting a chance to shine. And I'm just excited to see what Devil Dinosaur is going to be able to do, especially with the addition of Kahori this week, which obviously we don't have much stats on, but Kahori this week. We also have the addition of Moonstone and others to the archetype that allows you to do some fancy stuff with ongoing, specifically hand generation, especially when you consider that you can even Moonstone something like a Quinjet and then really start to drop things down. And then, of course, the Victoria hand providing that additional value. So a lot to love about this archetype moving forward, and it all starts with Devil Dinosaur. Similar to Devil Dinosaur, you do have Bishop getting a buff, going from a 3-1 to a 3-2. Like, not the craziest thing. The last time that we saw Bishop being a pretty legitimate contender in the meta was when Bounce was being played quite a bit. You saw Bishop in some decks featuring like Agent Venom, Kitty Pryde, stuff like that, because of the frequency of cards being played. And I don't think that Bishop was too far off, especially with like Taurus Falcon and other things. Like, Bishop was probably like the 13th, 14th card. This extra power essentially is like an extra activation you don't necessarily have to worry about. And so Bishop is more competitive, but the challenge is that a lot of the decks that are focused on playing lots of cards at once, turn 3 is really important, right? Turn 3 is like the Kitty Pryde Angela, or it's the Kitty Pryde Athena, it's the whatever, right? It's often this like combo centric part. And so as a result, it's hard to play Bishop on turn 3 because it slows the rest of your game down, despite the fact you might be getting some value. In the OG Agent Venom list, he was getting buffed up enough that all of a sudden it was worth it if you Agent Venomed on turn 2, or you happen to bast it or whatever. Like, Bishop was high enough that it was worth playing. So does this change anything for Bishop? Of course, as I said with Devil Dinosaur, having a relatively low collection level card getting a buff is always a good thing. This still might be a little bit on the outside, but at least it makes these bounce archetypes, it does give them a little bit of additional power, especially with Joaquin Torres Falcon, which honestly is probably better than we're giving it credit for, right? That bounce-based archetype, it's never quite been popular, although it's probably more powerful than we're giving it credit for. And maybe Bishop can find a way to kind of revitalize that, find itself in that deck, and then, those decks seeing a little more experimentation in play. At the very least, I'll give it a shot and see what happens. And now it's going to take us to one of the most significant nerfs of the given patch. That's Rocket and Groot. Rocket and Groot was celebrated on the Snapchat as being one of the absolute top cards of the season it came out. And it has been. It has proven to be absolutely fantastic. And a big part of that, though, is it's not just Rocket and Groot. Rocket and Groot has been a de facto very good 3-drop to include in decks, but it's because of how good other 2-drops have been that allow and enable Rocket and Groot. The prevalence of Iron Patriot is a huge contributor to Rocket and Groot's popularity, because Rocket and Groot is a very natural play on turn 3 into that that Iron Patriot location, which is baiting the opponent to try to contest. And so it doesn't surprise me that it's running a 55% win rate and a 16% meta share. Did this nerf had to happen? Probably, honestly, because if you think about the power being stolen as well as the power being applied to Rocket and Groot, it is a pretty big differential for a 3-drop. It probably was representative of power creep, and the movement was honestly awesome. Not only was it a bit of a mind game, but there's often games where like being able to just move Rocket and Groot into a location is a victory formation situation. So I really do like Rocket and Groot a lot. I think this change had to happen, but at the same time, I'm kind of sad. Every time these changes happen, I'm like, I kind of wish I played more Rocket and Groot, man, because like I knew the card was good, we had a lot of fun with it, and now it's nerfed, but I still think it's going to see a lot of play. Rocket and Groot's still a good card, so if you did pick it up relatively recently, don't fret, it's still good. If anything, what's happening now is it's another tick against that Iron Patriot combination, because Iron Patriot getting nerfed was technically a bit of a nerf to Rocket and Groot. Now they've both been hit, which takes that combo down pretty significantly. And then we go to MODOK. Now, this is actually really interesting because I didn't expect MODOK to get hit. This card has been in a pretty good spot. Coccia itself hasn't been great, but MODOK has been a good piece in activating things like, well, this card as a whole, but very specifically the Frigga Bullseye decks. Now, with MODOK, is his 5/8 power and his stat line legit? Of course it is. It felt really good to play MODOK because not only were you getting a game-winning effect under most circumstances that this card was often craving, but it was also an 8 power play, which was a lot. So I actually do agree with the team's assessment here that if you're trying to take a little bit off of discard, you can do it by taking a power off of MODOK, which is currently running a 10% meta share and a 53% win rate according to Untapped. However, I'm not convinced that MODOK was actually the problem piece. This might be one of those situations where they're kind of like, you know, what's it called? Like kind of kicking the stone down the road, or I can't think of what the saying is. Let me know in the comments if you can remember exactly what I mean. But basically, they're just kind of saying, okay, well, there's obviously an issue with discard. Discard's a little too high performing right now, but how do you nerf Frigga? Do you nerf Frigga? Then like, is that the answer? But Frigga's not really not the power point there. Like that's just the copying of the effect. Do you nerf Bullseye? Like, are you taking, but that's not really taking a power off Bullseye doesn't do that much. Do you take a power off Docking? Well, then the deck's dead. Like, what do you do to that deck? You take a little bit off MODOK. Maybe it's not problematic enough to warrant attacking those other combo pieces more aggressively, whereas this is just going to bring the entire archetype down a little bit. It does hurt something like a more dependable discard, which we're trying to get back to with Coccia and stuff, but I mean, something had to happen considering how prevalent those discard shells have been. Continuing the discussion about discard, we do have the first Ghost Rider, which honestly no one cared about and no one played. It goes from a 2/5 to a 2/6, which honestly, is that the original stat line? Like, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the original stat line was 2/6, and then they dropped it to 2/5, released it, now they're back to 2/6, and honestly, it's like, well, unfortunately, it just hasn't been seen much play, and Coccia has been like on the periphery of being pretty legit. Like I think it's performing pretty decently overall, and this might be the change that can help bring it to that next level. Because what was interesting about the Coccia deck, specifically with relation to the first Ghost Rider, is that the top performing Coccia decks weren't running Iron Man. They weren't running Gore and stuff like that. Like for instance, well, a lot of people's original designs did. They ended up just being legit discard with Apocalypse and Coccia together. It's like, what are we even doing? And so this buff does give you another reason to kind of carve out more of a niche for something like Coccia to make it so that you know, there's a reason to play a card like the first Ghost Rider. You're getting that 2/6 power and you're discarding a Gore, which allows you to bring it back with the Coccia, right? The tricky part with Coccia is that you really crave those extra activations to ramp up the power, and this is a turn where you're utilizing your discard effect to enable Coccia to bring something back and not necessarily discarding the Coccia or discarding the Apocalypse, right? So it's a little bit at odds with that, and that's where MODOK shined, whereas MODOK would discard things to bring back and also proc the Coccia. However, you're often discarding things like a Lady Sif or whatever that you might not necessarily want to bring back. Gore is better to bring back than a Lady Sif, but Coccia doesn't care as much because the power is going to be huge regardless. So first Ghost Rider going back to a 2/6, I think is a pretty good change. You like to see it because ultimately it's got to have some sort of power with it, especially with the condition of it. But we have seen traditionally that targeted discard is good, whether it's targeting odd, you know, on the right hand or odd numbered costs or powers, or doesn't matter what it is. Targeted discard tends to find a place Maybe even Silver Samurai will find a place eventually, but first Ghost Rider getting a little bit of extra power. This surprised me. I gotta be honest with you, I do like this change to Patriot. Patriot has felt like it hasn't quite kept up with the meta lately. It does have a couple decks that do work well. This does nullify a Ravonna synergy, but Ravonna wasn't really being played with Patriot, although Ravonna would benefit both Patriot and Mystique, which could provide some combo plays. What you're likely to see now is Patriot on 3, Moonstone on 4, Blarvel into, you know, Ultron type plays, right? And I mean, that's kind of choreographed. I think people are ready for that kind of play, and the buff to the Ultron bots does give it a lot of extra verticality. Because remember, Ultron bots, they were 1/1. Little, I was gonna call them Doom bots. Well, I can't remember what they're called all of a sudden. But anyways, those little bots, they used to be 1/1s. Now they're 1/2s, and now all of a sudden, Patriot plus Moonstone, like now those are huge. They're probably unnecessarily huge, to be honest with you. So Patriot getting a +2, +1, 2/2 power here is pretty legit. What I would really like to test though is like the non-Ultron style decks. Maybe have Ultron as a backup play for turn 6, but like I would like to see like what a legit Patriot deck, which runs Moonstone and then things like the Thing and other stuff, like, you know, Abomination, like Cyclops. I don't know, that might be pure cope. We've had so much power creep. I don't think those decks could possibly even compete, but I do find it a little fascinating. Like, could I do like a Squirrel Girl Patriot list with, like, you know what I mean? But you know, I don't know. I'm getting too excited about 1 power. It's not like this guy's a 3/5 now. This is a 3/2. You probably still need the Ultron plays, and there's a reason why that, you know, he still has a 48% win rate despite the fact that he's getting buffed. I suspect that this buff is less about the win rate and more about, hey, we want more archetypes being visible in Marvel Snap. Let's buff Patriot, put it on the radar, and so people will start playing more traditional Patriot lists and see where it takes us, right? So last time Patriot was like completely broken, I mean, Ultron's buff was kind of insane, was probably like the Abs Surfer, like with Brood Patriot era. It was like a year ago now, where like Patriot Surfer was legit like soul crushing, because obviously Absman got buffed pretty heavily too. So anyways, that's Patriot. It's buffed, so give it a shot. And then it takes us to Redwing. Now, this was a card that honestly, on paper, looked like it should have been better than it was, but man, did it suck when you play. Like, this was a perfect example of like when you're evaluating cards in advance. You're like, you know what, man, a 3/4 that pulls a card from your hand. Like, that's pretty cool. And then you're playing it and you're like, man, this sucks. Like, it's just, you have to activate it. You got to get the movement. Like, it doesn't just move itself. And then you're forcing cards into your plate. You're pulling random stuff. It's like, man, it didn't feel worth it. That's a 3/5. That's a significant amount of power, especially if you consider it just moves and like it's a 3/5 moving with extra power being dropped in hand. It's not insignificant. And so I'm willing to give Redwing another shot. I still think it's a bit of an awkward design. It's not my favorite card. Like, it's just not a design that I think I could reliably depend on to gain ranks, but it wouldn't surprise me if someone cooks a good Redwing deck. I just don't know if you'll want to play. You know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those types of cards where even if it is statistically and like numerically good, I think the effect is maybe awkward enough that people just be like, man, I'm not going to spend tokens on this. I'm not going to, you know, spend the money to build the Redwing deck that's tier 1 or whatever. I mean, if it's tier 1, maybe people will do it, but I don't think it'll get there. But anyways, at least it's buffed. This might be another one that's like Glenn's like, you know what, this is probably better than people think, but I still think it's a little awkward. So they're putting it back on the radar. 3/5's legit. We'll see where Redwing goes. And that's going to end this video here. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. We've got another video on the screen. If you're interested in watching some more Marvel Snap content, hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you on that next one.